Hey folks, well, let's see, this time around I want to go through kind of the gist of Lab 1 for 160. So in this lab, we're pretty much going to focus on getting into your Linux account, getting connected to getting connected to our servers as part of that, setting up the infrastructure you'll need for csci 160, and looking at how to get a lab, work on it a bit, and submit the work that you've done. And so for this particular lab, there's going to be kind of two parts to it. One part is what I would like you to try and get done in the lab session today, and there'll be a 1% bonus mark for the course if you can get through this in the session today. And that's pretty much just getting to the point of successfully submitting something. And then the part two for the lab is kind of repeating that process, but actually doing a little bit more interesting work with the C++ code side of it. So that's kind of where we're going to go. A lot of the mechanics are going to look the same in each subsequent lab, right? The process of connecting and setting up the lab, doing the work, and submitting the lab. It's just going to be a question of the specifics of the C++ you're doing that's going to vary from week to week for the most part. All right, so that is more or less where I want to go. I'm going to get rid of the talking head here. All right, let's see. So pretty much the cycle for any given lab is going to be, fire it up, head to the course website, hit the labs page, go through and, again, there's a bunch of information about deadlines and weeks with no labs and when the labs are and all that kind of thing. About halfway down the page here, we've got the different lab exercises for the term. And of course, today we're starting off with Lab 1, which is going to be due on Wednesday the 22nd at 5 for everybody. I originally had that set at the 20th, but that would make things a little tight for the people in the Friday lab. So we'll go for the 22nd. So if you hit Lab Exercise 1, you'll see, again, there's two parts. Part 1 is the 1% bonus that we want to try and get through today in the lab itself. And then part 2 is the more take-home part to be submitted sometime by the 22nd. And again, all the gory details on late penalties and that kind of thing are on the main page. So where we're going to go for this one is in the class. If this is the first time you've taken a comp sci course from us, I'll be giving you your account information. If you've previously taken a comp sci course from us, then you'll already have your login ID, your username, and your password will be whatever it used to be the last time you worked on your account. If you go to our tech notes page, I'll talk about this in a second if you ever need to reset your password if you can't remember it. I can look up your usernames, but I can't look up your passwords for you. So in this lab, if it's your first time on our Linux systems, you'll be getting your Linux account information from me, and we'll be using that in the steps that we go through for the rest of this. And again, we're pretty much going to go through setting up one of our labs, editing, compiling, and running a C++ program, and doing a submission of it. So first step is this idea of getting logged into your account. So on your course login page, you'll have a username that's usually part of your last name and maybe a couple of initials. Once in a while, there's a digit thrown on the end. And so what we'll do is, part 1 is actually just getting the browser open that's got the window that you're seeing right, or the web page that you're seeing right now. Part 2 is the interesting part here. So we'll open PowerShell, and this is kind of assuming that you're working in our labs and using a Windows machine. If you're using a Windows machine from home, this will work. If you're on a Mac, you can go to Applications and open the Terminal application, and it will let you do the exact same things we're about to do here. If you're on Linux, you can just open a terminal window again and again do the exact same things we're about to do here. So when you open up one of these windows, you'll see something that looks kind of vaguely like this. The actual prompt might be a little bit different, but basically just a big blank empty window. And we're going to be typing our Linux commands in there. And what we'll do is use the secure shell program SSH to connect to our server, our Linux server, the department Linux server. And again, the syntax is SSH a dash lowercase l. That's an L, not a 1. And then whatever your username is, and then the name of our server, so csci.viu.ca. And so we will just give that a try, and you can kind of see what this looks like. SSH-L, the student account I'm going to use is DaveStew. And again, we're connecting to csci.viu.ca. Now the spaces are important there, and it's pretty much all lowercase for what we're doing here. And it might, since this is going to be your first time connecting to the server, I've connected to it previously, it might ask you for confirmation that you trust this server, so you can say yes and proceed. When you're typing in your password, you'll see that nothing actually appears. But keep typing anyways and hit enter. And if I actually got my password right, it'll come up with the sort of message of the day from the server. And then it'll give you this prompt down at the bottom. So every time you type in a command, it'll try and perform the command and then give you another prompt. So we'll just go through and have a quick look at some first basic steps here. Again, we've looked at a little bit of Linux in the lectures, so what we're going to do is create a directory. So this is using this mkdir command to create a csci.160 directory. No, actually, I guess first off we can use ls to just take a look at what's in our directory right now. So this drops you in the home directory for your account. And so if we just type in an ls and hit enter, it'll show us what's in that directory right now. Now I've got a lot more in mind than you'll have in yours, just because I've got a bunch of rubbish from just other examples that I use this particular account for. But you'll have a bunch of stuff here. One of the things that we're going to do, and unfortunately I've already got a csci.160 account here. Well, if you've taken the course previously, you might want to move your csci.160 to, I don't know, old 160 or something like that. So in your case, you're going to want to create a brand new directory to hold your csci.160 stuff. So mkdir csci.160, and it creates this new csci.160 directory. If we do an ls again, we'll see our directory is there. If we do an ls on that directory, it'll show us what's inside it, which is nothing at the moment because we haven't put anything there yet. So we're going through this process, setting up a directory to hold our 160 stuff. If anything ever goes wrong when you type in one of these commands, Linux will give you some kind of a warning or an error message. If it doesn't do anything except give you a new prompt, then it kind of assumes that the command succeeded. All right. Now, we can move around again, and we've looked at this between, or in some of the lecture sessions where we said, okay, we can change directory and move into that new directory we just created. So with the cd command, and we can do an ls and see what's in there. Nothing. You can go back up a layer with the .cd dot. So that puts us back in our home directory. So we can move around a little bit. And again, we've shown some examples of that. Now, if you ever want to see exactly where you are in the system, you can use the pwd. And it says that, okay, in the Linux system, there's a directory for all of the home directories for everybody. Inside that, there's one that's just for students, and somewhere inside that is your own account directory. So that's where we are right now. All right. So what we're going to do for this lab only is to grab a special makefile that I've created and that's sitting over in my account that has a bunch of commands in it to set up different labs. So we're going to copy that over to your account so that you can run it and set up labs when you need them. So this particular file is going to be, well, there's two versions of the file, one for the Monday section and one for the Friday section. So you do actually have to grab the right one. So what we'll do is I'm going to show you the example for the Monday session, the section N01. So the command is a copy command, and you're going to specify that you want to copy from the instructor's account, ~wesselsd. You're going to specify the name of the file that you're trying to copy, and you're going to specify what you want to call it in your own account. So this has to be entered pretty much exactly as shown here, including spaces after the CP and spaces before that final make 160. So let's give that a try. So we'll try copying ~wesselsd / make 160-01 or 02 if you're in the Friday session, and make 160. And then hopefully this is typed in correctly, and it didn't complain, so it thinks it worked. And we can take a look at the file here, and it is in here someplace, I hope. Yeah, there it is, make 160. So it actually copied the beastie across. And so once we've got that, then we're going to make use of that to set up different labs. And so we're going to use this over and over and over again over the course of the semester. There's no harm done if you ever copy the make 160 file again, assuming you use the instruction correctly. But you don't. It's not something you need to do ever again. So let's see. What did I want to do? Let's go back to the web page for a sec, and where did I want to go? So we've done the copy. What I want to do is use a program called make, and I'm going to tell it to read from this file that I just copied over, and I'm going to tell it what I want it to create. Now, it can only create things that it's been given instructions for. So I've encoded a bunch of things in that particular file, telling it how to make, lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, that sort of thing. So the instruction that we'll use for today is this one. So we'll say make, the -f, and the file name that it's going to get its instructions from, and then the thing we want it to create. So we're going to want it to create, inside our csci.160 directory, a labx0. And it's going to go off, and I've created a special repository someplace that's got all of the labx0 original files in there. And so this is essentially going to set all that up so there's a markable version of it over on a server, and it's going to copy the material over to your account where you can work on it, and it's going to set things up so that you can submit it later. So there's a bunch of different things that it's going to try and do here. So let's give that a stab, and hopefully I've got my student account configured correctly here to work for this particular example. Make 160, csci 160 labx0. And we'll give that a try. And so this is where it's going through this process of going over to that server, setting up the markable version over there, and then this cloning step is where it's copying it into your account where you can work on it. So now, at this point, this git cloning process is where it has set up something in your csci.160 directory. It's created a labx0. So if we go in there and have a look, so if we cd into our csci.160 and do an ls, we see it's created a labx0. If we go inside that and do an ls, we'll see that it's created a C++ file for us, so copied from my repository someplace. It's created another special make file that we can use to compile and to submit our lab, and the README actually doesn't have anything of particular interest in it. So we've got our labx0 content now. We can try working on it. And so for the next stretch of the lab, we're going to try that kind of edit, compile, and submit cycle, or edit, compile, run, and eventually submit. So we're in our 160 in our labx0 directory. This make file is set up so that it can compile an executable for us. So I'm going to call the executable labx0. So this is the one that's got that machine code in it, the translation. So this is actually going to run G++ for us, and you'll see the command that it executes when we run it. So we're going to try this command out to make our labx0 executable. Again, we've got to be in the right directory to do this. We've got to be in our labx0 directory, but we can try make labx0 and hope this works. So you can see it actually ran the G++ command with the warning flags and whatnot turned on, and it read from our .cpp file, and it created an executable that it called labx0. So in theory now, if we do an ls, we should see that new labx0 file. And so now we can actually try running it. And lo and behold, it does something. We haven't looked inside the .cpp file to see what it's supposed to do yet, but it does actually compile and run something. So let's take a look at the contents of that C++ file and just try modifying it a bit. So we'll use the Pico editor to try editing this. So it's Pico, and the name of the file we want to try to edit. So Pico labx0.cpp. And it shows us the content of this C++ file. So it's going to go through, and it's got a comment at the beginning, it's got our hash include, it's got our int main, and it's got a printf that just says lab0. So nothing too fancy, and pretty much the same sort of idea as the hello world that we took a look at in lectures. And what we're going to do for today's lab is just alter that message in the printf to throw our name in there, lab0, and you can do whatever you like here. I'm going to say bye Dave. So this is just to show that you got the editor open, you managed to edit the file, and then compile it again, and then we'll submit it. So we make a change in here, stick your name in that printf statement, and then we're going to save it. So Control-O, and just hit enter because it's got the name of the file right. And then we'll exit, so Control-X. And now what we'll try and do is compile again, right? Until we compile, the executable won't be updated. We've only updated the source code. So we'll compile again, so make labx0. And it seems to be happy with the compilation. So we can try running it again just to make sure it worked. And yeah, so you can see our changes in there. And then to actually submit the lab, so to copy this stuff back to the place where I can mark it, it's make submit. And again, the instructions for this are contained inside that make file. And again, you'll see it goes through this process of connecting to this other server that's got the kind of markable version, or that's got the place to store the markable versions, and it goes through this process of copying stuff under your account, right? It copies your labx0 and whatnot for this course into that particular repository. And it actually tells you that, yeah, you submitted it within the deadline. For the labs and things for this course, on the server side, it thinks that the deadline for everything isn't until, sometime in December, just so that if we run into situations where, I give you a chance to redo something, the server doesn't care. So the official deadlines are all as posted on the website. So this actually worked. This actually pushed everything back. And that's where I want to get you, where I'd like you to get to for the lab session. If you get to there, you get the 1% bonus and everything should be happy. So what we'll do for the next part of the lab is to actually go through and try this again, but we'll do a labx1 that's got the full official exercise for the lab, and this is the one that's due by the 22nd. So let's go back and have a quick look at the web page here. So we've gone through this compiling and editing and make submit. When you want to get out, just type in log out and it'll disconnect and drop you back into PowerShell. If you want a little more practice with that cycle, once you've exited PowerShell, try the whole cycle again, right? Open up PowerShell, SSH in again, go back into your labx0 directory, And if you do, and if you have a look at things, you'll see that all of the work that you did, still exists over on the server. It's there until you decide to delete it sometime in the future. So, again, if you want the extra practice, just run through that cycle one more time. And again, if you're ever whenever you're working on your lab exercise 0, just make sure you're in that 160 lab x0. Ooh, there's that typo there. That should say lab x0, not lab 0. But just make sure you're back in the correct directory and you can work on that particular file. Right? As long as you're in the right directory, you can work on your lab x0 or your lab x1 or your lab x2 or whatever the lab happens to be. So there's the part 1. The part 2 is pretty much going through that same cycle again, but we're going to create a more interesting program. So again, you're going to open PowerShell, you're going to SSH into your account, and you're going to go through that same process for getting a lab in the first place, for getting your csci 160 lab x1. All right, so if you recall in part 1, to get the lab in the first place, we did this. Where are we here? We did this to grab lab x0. So you're going to do the exact same thing, but with lab x1. Right? So from your home directory, so do a cd to make sure you're back in your home directory and run this make command, and that will go off, well, with the 1 instead of 0, that will go off and create your lab x1. And once you've got it, you can cd into your csci 160 lab x1 directory and work on the lab. And again, it'll be the same process. Pico labx1.cpp to edit it, save, exit, make labx1 to try compiling it, /labx1 to try running it, and then whenever you're ready, a make submit to turn it in. And so it's the same basic process as we ran through with lab x0. And what we're going to do in this one is, for the lab, we'll get you to run through, and instead of having it just simply do that one printf, we're going to create some variables to store different bits of information. We're going to do a little mini election program here where it's going to try and calculate and display the vote share for 3 different parties in an election. So we're going to have some variables to store the number of votes that different parties get. We're going to have a constant for the total number of eligible voters. The variable names can be based on the 3 different parties that we're going to be having in our election. And the way the program's going to work is it's going to have a printf that displays to the user, please enter the number of votes entered for, one of the parties. And then it's going to read that and store it in a variable. And then the same thing for the other 2 parties. Do a printf to tell the user what you want them to enter, read it in, and store it in a variable. And then we'll do a little basic calculation to figure out what % each party got, and display the results of that at the end. And you can use whichever input and output process you're most happy with. And again, we'll be talking about the printfs and scanfs and couts and cins and all that in the lectures. So this is the idea for what we want our program to do. I do strongly recommend that you follow an iterative process when you're doing this. So you add one more piece of code and compile it and test it and make sure that that piece works. And then add one more little piece and compile it and test it and see that that works. If you try and write the whole thing out at once, then you tend to have all sorts of errors scattered through it, and it's really difficult to debug. Right? The weird error messages you get from the compiler, it's difficult to trace back where they came from. Whereas if you just take it one small step at a time, get that one step working, then things will tend to be much smoother. All right, and again, the objective is just to get this up and running and do your make submit by the end. And we'll talk about this more in the lectures as we go. All right, I think that's the plan. I will leave it there for now. Please feel free to catch me before or after class, or fire me an email if you have questions or problems. All right, more later, folks.